All right, so we're at part B and we're continuing our preparation for the CSEC Agricultural Science Exam 2024. It says, for this question, a recent visit to Joel's tomato plot. It was observed that most of the tomatoes were lying on the ground and rotting. Joel was advised that there are several methods available that he can use to preserve his crop. Now, food preservation is very critical in agriculture since, at certain points in time, especially if the country is not organized in such a way that there's a consistent way of how we produce the crops, and so it eliminates that surplus or that shortage on the market. So part one says state one advantage of preserving crops. And definitely one advantage would be it extends the shelf life. And by shelf life, we mean how long we can now have access so that we can provide the consumer with a crop that is still viable, still fresh. So preserving the shelf life or extending the shelf life rather is one advantage of preserving our crops. Now, in terms of preservation for tomatoes, it says suggest one method. We have several methods. Some may think of drying the tomato, like it or not, we can dry the tomato. You can basically freeze, and these things, as we said, they're aimed at extending the shelf life. Freezing helps to reduce the function of those enzymes that will cause spoilage. And a more popular method that some of our organizations, some of our companies, Grace Kennedy, a company in Jamaica, canning. So we can have canning of the tomatoes. Some persons may convert it to chutney. You have tomato paste, and all of these would have extended the shelf life of the tomato that Joel has on the ground, rotting. Those would no longer be of any value to the consumer in question. The next question says, after speaking with Joel, you realize that he is not sure about when to harvest his tomato crop. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the tomatoes were lying down on the ground rotting, because he doesn't know the maturity index for the tomato. What is it that we look for in this crop to ensure that it is ready for harvesting? Advise Joel on one sign he can look for to determine if his tomato fruits are ready for harvesting. Now, harvesting is basically getting the fruit from the field to your packaging house. A lot of things have to be considered. Tomatoes, based on the crop that you're doing, different methods are used to harvest that crop. A matter of fact, even with tomato, it may even vary with the variety of tomato that you're growing. Some of the signs that we look for may vary again. And so one of the things that we look at would have been the size of the fruit. But as I said before, um, some of the varieties don't produce. You, the farmer, Joel, would have had an idea of the type or the variety of tomato that he has and to note the size, because not all tomatoes will grow to a large size. And so if you're waiting on that, then you may wait forever. And so knowing the variety that he has is very, very important. But size is a factor to look for when you want to note if the tomato is ready for harvest. Another thing would have been the color. And some persons would want to wait. And maybe what Joel was doing is waiting until the tomatoes were red. And so, sorry. And so what you find is that that is going to limit the time because it's a process. Marketing is a process. And if you harvest those tomatoes at that stage, then you have limited time to get it to the consumer. The consumer has limited time to utilize it. And so we basically when the tip of where it is connected to the stem basically starts to have that lighter color in terms of a green appearance. And again, this may vary in terms of the variety. Those are some of the signs that you look for. So a darker green is not a tomato that is ready for harvesting. The other thing that we can utilize as well would have been the texture. So the texture, how the tomato feel, and you have to be careful with this one not to bruise or damage the tomato fruit because again, this is something that we're looking for in our crop. We wouldn't want to have soft produce selling to our consumers. So size, color, and of course texture are some of the signs that we look for. Now, figure 5 shows two tools that can be used to harvest crops, X and Y. X is basically a fruit picker. Y is a shear or a secateur. These are two instruments that can be utilized for the harvesting of tomatoes or crops in general. Which of the tools, X or Y, is more appropriate, though, for Joel to use to harvest his tomato fruits? Give one reason to support your answer. Now, if you look closely, X basically it can be used, but the question says more appropriate. Tomatoes are very fragile fruits, and you wouldn't want them to fall, hit the ground, or you wouldn't want a situation where the tool itself is damaging. One thing about tomatoes is that while you're harvesting, you should cut it away from the stem in terms of the callus and not necessarily pull on it. So if you're harvesting by hand, pulling on the tomato will basically reduce the shelf life of your tomato because you're damaging the stem where it is attached to the fruit and you're pulling that area and it's going to create an opening where microorganism can now enter and this will create a problem for your fruit while you carry out the marketing process. So X, I wouldn't give X the most appropriate. Basically, this fruit picker you pick and it falls into the basket that container area, and then you basically carry it or put it in another perforated container that would ensure while you're in the field limits bruising against each other. So the secateur, which is Y, or the pruning shear, you would basically have as the most appropriate because it can be used to cut. And as I said before, we're not going to be pulling. So the tool, the secateur, and the reason is while harvesting tomatoes, it's recommended that you cut away the fruit from the plant instead of pulling it, right? So part 3 says outline 3 main steps Joel should follow when harvesting his tomato fruits that are at the correct stage of maturity. So he recognized that the fruits are now, based on what you told him, the texture, the size, the color, all of those are now intact. They're right. Now, the time of day is very important in terms of our step, because you have what we call field heat. And if you really harvest tomatoes at 12 o'clock, in the Caribbean, we have the extent of our temperatures very hot in some days, even though with climate change, the concept of having those fruit with that heat may be something that will lead to the shorter shelf life. And not even say maybe, it will lead to the shorter shelf life. So the time of harvesting, early morning, late evening, where less field heat is there present. And so when you harvest the crop. Now, secondly, we want to ensure that we cut the fruit and not pull it from the stem. And so that in itself, we would use the tool above or a sharp knife, and we cut away the fruit from the stem. The next, or from detach it from the parent plant. The next part of it would have been how you go about putting that in a container. Now we have baskets, we have perforated crates or other containers that allows for ventilation, that allows for a limit in terms of bruising against each other. Some persons use the shredded paper to allow, so it shouldn't be put in any form of container that is closed and that will allow for a buildup of heat. And then how you go about transporting it out of the field, we want to do that as quick as possible and get it to the packaging house so that we can have it sorted and graded and labeled and packaged and sent to the consumer. Farmer Amy advised Joel that he needs to sanitize his harvesting knife with a sanitizing agent after harvesting each row of plants. It two reasons why harvesting tools should be regularly sanitized during harvesting. Now, the knife. Remember, similarly, if you go to the hospital, you would want to ensure that the tools and equipment, if you happen to have a surgery being done, you would want to ensure that the doctors have sanitized those tools. You don't want them to be cutting inside of you with a tool that is not properly sanitized. And the reason is this can cause for entry. The tool itself can basically cause an entry to a disease that you didn't have. So you go into the hospital to do a surgery and you leave with a disease that you didn't have because of the tools that the doctor used on you. Same thing for the plant. While you're going through, you're visiting different plants, and that same tool is used to cut within several plants. And so at different intervals, what they're telling Joel is that it is very critical to sanitize the tool because this will minimize the transfer of microorganisms. So microorganisms which are pathogenic, let me be more specific because not all microorganisms will lead. So the pathogenic ones, whether your virus, your protozoa, your fungus, your fungi, or your bacteria, they can cause diseases. And once you cut into a healthy plant with a knife that visited another plant that was not healthy, you basically have that situation where you can transfer the disease to that healthy plant. The other reason comes under that same breath where you're making a cut into the plant. And so you don't want the area to basically have any form of microorganism to enter. So the tools should be sanitized on a regular basis because you're opening the plant to whatever diseases or pathogenic microorganism so that they can enter the plant. These will ensure that the plant itself, even after harvesting, would basically have not gotten damaged through the process because you're using sanitized tools and equipment to do your harvesting. So that is very critical. So they provide this diagram. Figure 6 shows a breed of goat found in the Caribbean. All right, so it's white in appearance. We've seen those pointing ears. Let's identify the breed goat shown in figure 6. And this breed looks like the Saanen. So Saanen. Saanen. State two purposes of which this breed of goats is reared. Definitely, just by looking at the others, and if you know anything about the Saanen, they are good producers of milk. You get a good volume of milk from these goats. And some persons are not aware that goat milk is basically consumed. So we can use this breed of goat for the purpose of it's a dairy animal. And likewise, we can also use it for meat. So it is considered to be a animal that you can utilize for your meat. A misconception that we have is to call the meat mutton when indeed mutton is for sheep. Chevron is the name for goat meat. So for meat and dairy. Farmer Jeff produces boilers, birds. He noticed that his current batch of birds looked droopy and had diarrhea with blood streaks in their droppings. Identify the disease that is affecting this batch of broiler birds and state the agent that caused this disease. We spoke a little bit earlier in the previous question about in relation to crops and cutting into plants. And here we're now looking at broiler birds. We know that those birds are used for meat purposes. And one of the diseases that we are affected by is this disease called coccidiosis. So the signs that were presented in the question where there's blood streaks in their droppings, and the animals had diarrhea. Coccidiosis is that disease that they're basically describing. Now, coccidiosis is caused by your protozoa. So the protozoa, a lot of misconceptions where students may think that it's caused by a virus or a bacteria. No, one of the pathogenic organisms is the protozoa, right? And so that is what causes that disease. So just 3 ways Farmer Jeff can control this disease on his farm. Now, you have to, when CXC ask you questions related to diseases, look at the word that they use, control, and that would have meant that the disease is there on your farm already. Prevention and also treatment. So there are three different words that may be utilized when asked about a disease. So how can we control this disease? Now, one of the things that the protozoa, um, one of the part of the life cycle is living in the litter. We know that the litter is there to collect the droppings. And so to control this disease, when a part of the life cycle there the oocytes are basically passed out in the feces, the eggs are passed out in the feces of the animal. And so if you recognize that you have this disease, litter management is very critical. So the moisture in the litter, whether by the droppings or whether by movement of the waterers while filling, while cleaning, or rain blowing in, shouldn't happen. But if that happens, or a leakage on your roof or wherever, whatever will cause your litter to be moist, you have to manage that, because by managing that, you can basically control the spread of this disease. So removal of wet, damp litter, and basically placing um, litter that is more dry, or dry litter. Very important. Turning the litter as well. So turning the litter allow for better ventilation, exposing the litter so that it can be air dried, and this also is very good. The basically quarantine, isolate infected birds. So you take them out of the, once you recognize that these birds are the ones that have the disease, to control it, we'll take them out of the general population, culling the removal of these birds, and we can also, sometimes they're killed, and that is in an attempt to basically reduce the spread of the disease. Sanitation, sanitation of the tools, sanitation of the footwear, having the presence of a foot bath is, so when you think about biosecurity, um one you may, the farmer Jeff may have basically had more than one poultry house. Maybe it's just one house that had the occurrence of this disease. Now moving from one house to the next is very critical, and so a foot bath should be there to help with the spread of the disease, moving going to basically carry out the activities of even turning the litter, providing feed, providing water, moving from one house to the next. These pathogens can be transmitted via the footwear of the operator or the clothing. So all of those should be taken into consideration. So one, proper litter management, ensuring that you remove or cull or get rid of the sick birds that have it, and also biosecurity, where you deal with your foot bath and maintaining proper hygiene of the persons who are working on your farm and the tools and equipment. Advise Farmer Jeff on two recommendations that he should adopt as part of a total disease management program on his farm. And right here, you may see between the batches of birds, because if you notice that you have this disease, one of the things that is going to be critical is to ensure that you don't have a reoccurrence with the next batch. So proper sanitation between the two batch. If you now recognize that this batch of bird has the disease, it is able to reside in the litter. And so sometimes persons, farmers will reuse the litter by putting it out in the sun, allowing it to dry out, and then reuse it in the poultry house. Since this batch had a disease, then we wouldn't recommend. So disposing of that litter Sanitizing the poultry house before you put in another batch, very critical. Have your biosecurity in terms of cleaning all the equipment, setting up your foot bath, ensuring that you don't have persons entering onto your compound and just walk into your poultry house just like that. So you want to basically have some good level of screening, because really and truly, even with the fact that sometimes it is due to wild birds carrying in the disease. So sometimes you have pigeons or other birds that will linger just to try and get the feed from these animals. And by doing that, they are exposed to the wild, and sometimes they have built up this immune system. So they're in the wild and they wouldn't show the signs, or it's not affecting them as much. But when they get in contact for some reason, go up into the top of your poultry house and allow for getting in there and now pass the feces, this will introduce the pathogen. So proper um control in terms of the other birds around is even a very critical aspect in terms of recommending a proper disease management. So continuous cleaning, sanitizing of the tools. You don't have to wait until an outbreak occurs. So you should have a schedule where he would basically, in an organized way, maintain his poultry house, deal with the litter, steps to take if you now recognize between batches that you have the occurrence of the disease. You basically sanitize everything. The use of medication as well. Some farms actually reach to the point where they may administer vaccines to the birds to help to minimize the occurrence of this disease or any disease. Question 6 brings us to the diagram of a digestive system of a poultry, which is the chicken. So the digestive system we have on here A, B, and C. We talk about the labeled areas, the proventriculus. We also have the small intestine. It says name the parts labeled A, B, and C in figure 7. Now definitely A is the beak, and we know that the beak is like a modified mouthpiece for the chicken. It's very hard. Um, just to talk about it a little bit, it helps with the breaking of the food item. So when you see the chicken walking and pecking, even in the wild, it helps to break these items up, because chickens lack teeth, so they don't have anything to chew the food. So this helps with the mechanical digestion, breaking in the larger pieces of food into smaller pieces. Um, we have B, and that's the crop. One thing about the crop is that it stores the food temporary, and it moistens the food right there. You don't have any digestion taking place in the crop, but it stores the food temporary. In growing broilers, one of the things that persons will practice is the withdrawal of food feed 24 hours before slaughtering, and that ensures, because it's going to be stored temporarily in the crop, and that wouldn't make use. It's like you're wasting your feed. Remember, the feed is basically one of the highest input costs to the farmer in terms of livestock. Then we have the proventriculus. The proventriculus um, is basically that area that would have mimicked our stomach in such a way. That's where you find enzymes. And then C, we have the ventriculus, or the gizzard. And then, of course, you have the small intestine, and we know that is where absorption and also digestion of the different nutrients happening. It says explain one similarity and one difference in function between the proventriculus and the small intestine. Now, one thing about both of these things, the similarity, both of them have enzymes. While the concept, a matter of fact, let me be more specific. In the proventriculus, we have pepsin, and so protein digestion occurs in the proventriculus. Likewise, protein digestion occurs in the small intestine. So that's one similarity between both. They both consist of enzymes that will help with the digestion of protein. The difference is one, which is the proventriculus, will lack the other enzymes, and so the small intestine basically have the ability to digest other nutrients such as carbohydrates and fats with the which the proventriculus cannot do. So that's the difference right there. So also you have absorption happening in the small intestine. Not a lot of absorption will be happening in the proventriculus. The main site would have been the small intestine. So that's the difference right there. On a recent field trip to a mixed livestock farm, it was observed that the farmer was feeding concentrates to the mature pigs and a mixture of concentrates and herbage to the mature goats. For each class of animal, provide two reasons why the different types of feed materials were fed. Now, with the pigs, we know the concentrate, they're mature, and so the concentrate provides a high diet in terms of energy. So the concentrate is basically focusing on fattening the pigs, ensuring that they put on the recommended weight. The concentrate as well is there in the diet since you want to ensure that you have it is designed so the nutritionist would put in the different nutrient requirement for the mature pigs, ensuring that they're meeting their required needs. And so the concentrate would have been utilized for the pigs. Now, in terms of the goats, yes, they need that energy, but as well, when you look at and I didn't mention this, the pigs, their digestive system is similar to human beings. They're monogastric animals. While we know goats are referred to as ruminants. And so they're able to make use of the herbage that is given in their diet. They have the four compartment stomach that is capable of breaking down and obtaining the nutrients from the herbage and utilizing it. And also they can get the energy and the additional nutrients likewise from the concentrate. So the goats, while you may not have the availability of the herbage all the time, you still can supplement your herbage with the concentrate. For the pigs, they don't necessarily have the digestive system to deal with the herbage, and while they would basically be looking at to put on the weight, because herbage is more of fiber, And the concentrate would be better for the mature pigs because those animals, you're growing them and you want them to put on the weight, increase in size, muscle mass, all of those you're not going to get by feeding them the herbage. So you give them the concentrate. All right. So that's for the goats. The goats can obtain the nutrients from the herbage because they have the stomach. Likewise, they need also the concentrate just to also to supplement and give them additional nutrients because we're also fattening them as well. So that would conclude our part B for exam preparation. Again, if you like the video, subscribe, share, and of course, you will be notified when we upload. Again, all the best to the students sitting their CXE agricultural exam for 2024. This is Mr. Thomas. Thank you for watching.